I was recently pondering how exactly I think and how I come up with ideas. And I came to the realization that, for lack of a better word, I treat my mind almost like a sandbox. And if you imagine within the sandbox, the sand itself is the raw idea and creative material that you use to create a thought, a logical sequence, if you will. And what I like to do is I play with the idea for a little bit with no expectation of any outcome. And almost like a kid would. If you've ever seen a young kid play with like his Legos or dolls or toys or whatever the hell it is they play with these days. Now, I got to thinking, okay, I noticed that a lot of people get very, very, attached to their ideas. And of course, there's a reason, and intellectual property is, of course, extremely important. There's a reason why now we have copyright laws and patent laws and intellectual property laws and so on and so forth. And I don't say that we should not be attached to our ideas, but if we hold on to them so tightly and we don't share them, then in my opinion that's pretty selfish, because ideas and knowledge, in my opinion, should be open source. If there's no sense in keeping it to yourself, you want to share it with the world. Now, why might it be desirable in order to treat your mind like a sandbox and to play with an idea without any expectation of outcome? Well, for me, it doesn't assign any ownership to the knowledge. Like I said before, I think that knowledge is open source. Everyone should strive to collect as much knowledge as possible, but also to share that knowledge. Of course, you can use it to propel your own personal successes, but after a certain point, why else do we have, these really smart, knowledgeable people who have achieved great measures of personal success, but then they decide to share it to the world? Yes, they might do so for profit, but at the same time, think of where our schools of thought and philosophy would be if we didn't have one person who originated, let's say, a thought or an idea, and then spent their whole time developing it, and then passed it on to somebody else who could have improved it or tweaked it or polished it and made it, something else. And then that person passes the torch to the other person, and so on and so on and so on. That's how we develop schools of thought. That's how we develop philosophical for lack of a better word, dynasties and traditions, if you will. Another reason why I like to treat my mind this way is that if you have no expectation of outcome, there could possibly be a reduction in bias, because again, if you're just playing with the idea for the idea's sake, and at the very least, you're not overly attached to it at that point. So if you're not expecting any outcome, you won't potentially be influenced to let your mind wander in a certain way. You can make better, or I should say braver, leaps with your logic, and to create perhaps a different perspective that you haven't seen before. Also, the reason why I like it is that it puts you in a true state of discovery. And of course, discovery is very, very novel. It's like lightning striking. When you discover something, it's that novelty which helps the concepts to stick. So when you're putting your mind in that state of discovery, you're actually helping at least I find it helps me to help the concept stick, and I retain more knowledge. I retain that thought afterwards, but again, without being attached to it. It sounds a little bit paradoxical, but anyway, that's I find at least it helps me. Not to mention, it's fun to create new thoughts, new ideas, new concepts with that raw material. I don't think that people understand how smart they actually are and how powerful their brain is, and the fact that it can be fun to create these new, to see where a thought goes. It's not always fun, because sometimes if you let your mind wander too much, it might not work out. But at the same time, you can also you may be able to get a eureka moment, or at the very least, you may be able to find a different outlook on life that you didn't have before. Leading into this point, it can help to generate a new set of values. Again, this is a very, very Nietzschean concept in the sense where we always have to undergo the three metamorphoses from the camel to the lion and to the child being, of course, the last metamorphosis, where you have a space where you can play and where you can create these new values without the danger of the great dragon of thou shalt, and without the lonely burden of I will. You've had those experiences, and now you're in this safe zone, which is full of raw creativity, where you can create your new values that are not, and you're not shackled by everything else that came before you. It's a little bit more of an esoteric reason, but I think it's important nonetheless. It also, and I mentioned this before, it helps to foster a different way of approaching other problems. Because you have that raw creativity, you're essentially able to, the mind is your oyster, if you will. You can approach it however which way you want until you find a solution that works for you. And my personal favorite as well, it helps out massively in debates because it doesn't make it as personal. So let's say if you end up engaging in a debate with somebody, you can argue the point and argue the idea. And this doesn't mean to say you shouldn't, like when I say you shouldn't be overly attached to it, that doesn't mean you shouldn't stick to your guns. But once the battle is over, I mean, it's not like your gun is still going to be super glued to you. And a lot of people still have their guns super glued to them. They take things very, very personally in debate when all we're debating is just an idea. And I say just an idea, and some people may get upset at that. And this goes to show how entrenched that attachment is. And again, it's not personal. We're just talking. We're having a good time. We're trying to get smarter together. So these are some of the reasons why I think it's desirable to treat your mind as a sandbox. I kind of want to offer what I do in order to help get my mind into that state, in order to prepare the sandbox, if you will. So how can you do it? Firstly, you have to be very Socratic, and you have to admit that you don't know shit. So again, Socrates says, "I know that I know nothing," and essentially you have to treat it like that. It's a blank sand. It's a brand new sandbox, no creases, no nothing. There's just sand, the box, and whatever else. Of course, there's stuff outside of the box, which are little tools that you can bring in, hence the term thinking outside the box. But again, you almost have to let your mind wander. Don't just focus on the sandbox. Pick up a bucket from outside of the box, or other things. You almost have to let your mind wander that way. Essentially, you have to become a kid again, and you have to remember what it was like to have that wonder, that first climbing of the tree, the first book you read, the first sight that you remember seeing, or the first time you saw something really, really pretty, or something really, really terrible, or something really, really sad or happy. You have to try to recapture that wonder, and because again, wonder helps with the novelty. Is a very novel experience. It may be a little bit more difficult to do when you're an adult, but I still think it's very, very important. It's almost necessary when you're treating your mind as a sandbox. It takes a lot of practice, but it is very, very rewarding because, again, you're able to play with the idea for the idea's sake, and you don't add stress to it. It's not like, oh, I have to come up with this idea for my business because otherwise it'll fail. There's no pressure on there. There's no expectation of outcome. You're relaxed. That's where true inspiration, I think, really comes from. So anyway, that's my little thought for the day. And I turn the question on to you. Do you think in a similar fashion? Do you treat your mind as a sandbox or more as a river coursing through? Tell me in the comments below how you perceive your mind to act and how you affect it as well. How does your thought process work? Like I said, drop a like on the video if you enjoyed it and a comment down below to share your thoughts. And as always, Thank you so much for watching.